So I finished The Prince yesterday. So this is gonna be number three because number two for the book for number two it got a little bit corrupted, so I have to redo the video. But anyway, I got the audiobook from Livervox, which is pretty interesting. They try to translate it directly without commentary, which I appreciate because a lot of the older books they have a lot of commentary and completely sometimes disregard the book itself. Like The Art of War, I had to find like 3 books in order to actually know what the actual Art of War was, because everything else was just commentary on what the Art of War meant and not the actual book. So The Prince is written by Niccolo Machiavelli. He's considered a philosopher of his time, but in all actuality, if you would relate what he does, what he was actually, to modern day society, he would more be like an advisor instead of just a philosopher. Like he was in his time, he was also advisor to princes, kings, and rulers of countries. And The Prince was a book, well, not really a book, it was more like a letters or collection of letters in a sense that were put together that he sent out to noblemen and rulers in a sense, because originally it said that the original book The Prince was never actually sent to anyone. It was never actually intended to be given to a specific person. It was kind of like a collection of what he was doing at the time. It was not his last work, but it's one of the more popular works that he's done, especially over his lifetime. He has quite a few, but The Prince is particularly dealing with ruling nations and kingdoms for either new princes or kings or princes and things like that that have already been in seat. It's directed as towards a prince because as you go through the book, it always refers to things that you should or shouldn't do as you rise to power. So in other words, as you become the ruler of a nation, so on your way to being king. It doesn't actually address anything when you're already king, but it does address things that you can do to keep yourself from losing power. It is an interesting read to see how the world was perceived back when it was written, to see how rulers and people, subjects were, well, how they thought basically. Granted, some of the stuff in The Prince no longer applies. Well, no longer applies exactly the way it said originally. For instance, making your subjects happy versus making your backers happy. In other words, making people that paid for you to get in power versus the people that you're actually ruling. Which one should you make happy? And in the book, it tells you about the people who put you in power. If that happens and you didn't get into power from solely the people wanting you in power, it is important to back those people and important to do what those people want. However, that puts your life in danger because doing that too much will make the people hate you and they will kill you. Now, in modern day society, people don't kill their rulers, and unfortunately we can't just kick them out of office just like that. But it also goes to show that even then, up until now, the people that got you in power are usually the people that are most important to your actual leadership when you're in power. You do everything you can to please the people that put you in power, versus regardless of who it is, even if it's the people or if it's just backers in general. You want to please the people that put you in power first. Though I'm not really gonna address anything on politics, this is very important when you think about it, and it is one of the main takeaways from this book is how you get in power and how you keep your power. And the book deals with quite a few different scenarios, but its main purpose is telling you, be careful which one you choose, because that will pretty much determine how you rule your kingdom or how you stay in power. For instance, it tells about when you have power being violent or doing things that are considered immoral or shady in a sense. It's very different when you're put in power by people that are just backing you versus the kingdom itself. If you're put in power mostly by the kingdom or the people of the land, you're going to not want to do a lot of that. You're going to, if you have to, make sure you do as much of it as possible as once, because no matter what happens, you're going to see as being immoral in that instant. It doesn't matter if you kill one person or 10,000 people, you're still seen as being equally immoral in that one instant. So if you concede or condense all the things that you're about to do that will be considered immoral or go against what traditionally is supposed to be done, doing it all at once is better than doing it every so often, because if you do it every so often, you will become hated by the people, and eventually even the people that backed you will start to double think whether or not they should keep backing you. And keeping the same example of killing 1 to 1,000 people, if you kill one person every couple weeks in a year or so, even though you've only killed maybe 50 people in total in your 3 years of being in the leader, you're going to be hated because you've been killing one person every few weeks publicly. But then if you kill 10,000 people publicly at once and never do it again, you will be regarded better as more moral than the person that did it every so often, even though you technically did a lot worse than the person that did just once every few times, because they only killed a very small number of people. And even if those people are criminals, it will still regard towards you as being more immoral than if you were to kill 10,000 civilians that didn't deserve it. Because in that instance, it's more, you're appealing to optics more than anything else, because once the act is completed, how it is remembered is a completely different thing. How it is remembered is always going to be the same, regardless of the reason you did the act or regardless of the scale of the act. It's going to still be remembered as an unjust act, but that's all it's going to be remembered as an unjust act, but it's going to be remembered as one act. So committing that act multiple times makes you more unjust versus if you commit that one act on a larger scale. And reading this book gives you kind of an insight into how things like Hitler actually stayed in power and became such a powerful ruler, able to start a world war. Because it shows you how if you disguise what you're doing as for the people, and then also if you take the initiative to make sure what you're doing uses funding from other countries or other places besides what the people have, then you're looked at as a greater and juster ruler. So if you go to a different country and you steal their wealth and then you spend it frivolously and you just give it away, just spend it on anything, you're still looked at as a better ruler as if you collected tax from your people and built roads for your people that were expensive. You would still be a better leader frivolously spending the capital from a different nation on anything, even if you're spending it on just war times and just giving out free food. Even if you build a road that's completely unusable versus a person or ruler that collected taxes and built the best road your people can have and made their lives a little bit better. The fact that you didn't use the people's money and you didn't take from the people to do this is actually what makes you a better leader in the eyes of the people. And using tactics like that can actually boost your standing in the nation and your standing in as a leader in general. So when you look at it from that standpoint, you can actually begin to kind of understand why many leaders that we may perceive as unjust back throughout history, even some of the most people that kill more people than anybody else, they have millions of deaths to their name, how they stayed in power for so long. It's not just because they were a great leader, and it's not because they just stood there and people feared them. It's because they're not just feared, but they're also loved by their people, because they chose to attack one people over none, and they chose to lift up the people that backed them over anybody else. And they did this in a way that it didn't negatively impact that person at all. They took it from everybody else, no matter what the cost to other people were, just so they can do what they wanted. And then on top of that, there is another very unusual thing the book said that stood out to me quite well, and it is, no leader in power that gets anything done is considered to be a nice leader. And that stood out to me quite a bit, because it was showing that all the leaders throughout history, all the great leaders throughout history, were never considered to be nice people or good men in general. They're always considered to be somewhat bad of a person, or somewhat of a, well, I wouldn't say mean, because it's on a different level besides me. So they're considered to be people that are brutal in sense, and people that were not friendly to begin with. And in a sense, it does portray as no good leader is basically just, or the other way around, a just leader isn't a good person. The person itself is not good and it's not a great person, but that's what it takes to be a good leader, because they have to sacrifice something small for the greater good, or they have to do things in a way that's not perceived as being wrong or perceived as being immoral in order to get things done. And a lot of times it's not exactly things that are immoral or unjust, it's just the way that they're conducted and the way they speak is at times not very considerate to people around it. He even gives an example of a great general that always spoke with a harsh and rude tone at all times, but he also never disciplined or regarded anyone that spoke back to him in the same manner badly. He actually listened attentively to anyone that spoke back to him in the same manner, because it seems as though, because he was speaking harsh in a rude tone, but he was getting to the point. He was always putting what needed to be done over how people felt. He chose the path that needed to be done versus the path that made you happy at the time. Which, even though people may not believe that, if you look back at US presidents or any world leader currently now, they all have a personality type that has a lot in common with a psychopath, because that is what is required to be a world leader. You cannot be swayed by emotions or how you feel about a topic, because you may feel bad about something, but in the long run, that thing that you feel bad about that you may do simply because you felt bad about it, you may prove something simply because you felt bad about it, may in turn around to greatly harm your people. And that is one of the things why it takes someone that is not kind to be a leader, because they have to first think about not only how will something affect their people, not in the sense of how will it make them feel, but how is it going to affect their lives. Will it damage their lives? Will it damage their livelihood? Will it make their life overall worse? That is the thing they should be thinking about first, and not how it affects how a person feels or how their people is going to feel about it. It even talks about being generous in a sense where your generosity to others may come back to haunt you, and it will sometimes may come back to hurt your people, because you're using the people's money or the people's resources to be generous to somebody else without anything in return, will come back to actually haunt you. In the book, it generally says this will get you killed, because in that time, princes generally got killed if they didn't know what they're doing and they didn't rise to power to be an appropriate king, or a king that could lead their country correctly. They would go to war and they would end up killed most of the time, because then they would lose the support of their people, and their people might actually turn over to their enemy. But overall, The Prince was a very interesting read. It wasn't my favorite read, because I'm generally more of a continuous book, and that is not what The Prince is. Because even though it is collected into a book form, it is quite obvious from the way The Prince actually chops up in chapters and the way the tone changes throughout the chapters of each of the book, that it is not actually written as a solid book, but it is written as multiple pieces that can be read separately, and it's kind of like a checklist to being a prince in general, a checklist to being a ruler or in power, and things you should do and things you should avoid. And though a lot of it can be applied to a regular person or even most leaders in power at this point, some things can be still used in your everyday life. Like, one of the things that are really important is be careful of your surroundings, be careful of the people that surround you, how you got to know the people you surrounded yourself with, because that actually will impact how you live, in the sense that it will impact the choices you make and the things you do on a daily basis to make sure those people stay around you. So be careful with that, because that can turn you from being a person that you consider to be good to being a person that you also yourself consider to be bad. And then another thing, probably the biggest takeaway I got from this, or probably the most important thing that was written in the book that relates to modern day society, is be true to who you are. Not in the sense of do what I feel like doing, but do the things the way that feels most comfortable to you and how you want to do them. So don't just follow somebody else and do it the way they intend to do it, because a lot of times that will cause you to fail. And it's almost as though he took this directly from a different book I read, because it's phrased almost exactly the same. Even though he didn't phrase it in a sense, he used a story or an algorithm of a general to describe it. The book The Alchemist says this at the beginning. That's very important. It says, follow who you are and do what you are meant to do, because when you do that, the universe will conspire to ensure that it is done. He uses the example of a general that conquers nations, and I forgot what general it was, but basically he talks about how the general does this forcefully and unceasingly, and everything he does right away. Like, as soon as he finds out what's going on, he acts on it almost immediately. And even though the general died at an early age, he was considered to be a great general. But at the same time, he gives the example that if this general had chosen to depart from the way he normally does it, and if he had listened to other people that said he should wait and contemplate and think about his actions first a little bit more before he acts, he would have surely failed as a general. He would not have been such a great general as he was, and in his time that he did. The reason he became such a great general, and he stayed such a great general his entire life and basically his entire career, is because that is how he was as a person. He acted when he knew what happened. He didn't wait, he didn't think things over, he didn't mull things over for very long. He acted directly on everything and as fast as possible. And he theorized that because of his constant acting and his constant being this way is why he stayed in power for as long as he did, and why he never failed to defeat his enemy in any of his battles. But he also said that if the general were to fail to continue to act in this manner for even one battle, he would have been killed in battle, because it was this ferocity and this attacking and willingness to constantly go forward without thinking things completely through before he started. He was thinking his actions through as he was fighting, that got him to where he was. But because of it and the kind of person he was, if he were to choose to stray from that path, he would be defeated quite easily. And this is why following your own nature instead of the nature of what is intended to be correct for your position or intended to be proper for what you are doing will most of the time actually be a better choice. Following your nature to do things will help you, and it will be easier for you because it's already what you would do and it's already how you function. So changing how you are to suit a position will most times be a detriment to you, because you're unable to act in the way you should, and at times you're unable to act at all because you are too busy. Well, you're too busy being conquered down, trying to figure out how you should act in this situation instead of acting. And that is kind of what is meant by, if he had chosen to act in a different way, more proper for general of his standing, he would have lost, because he wouldn't have been acting in general. He would have been too busy trying to figure out how he should be acting to actually do anything, and he would lose a battle and get killed as soon as he started. So my big takeaway from this book was, watch your leaders, because depending on how they gain the power they have and where their support comes from or their money comes from is going to determine what policies and what things they stand behind. Also, act in a manner that is more of your nature instead of following someone else's nature, because a lot of times this will help you along in your day-to-day life. Well, that's it for now. We'll see you guys in the next one. I have another couple books ready to already do reviews for, so later.